Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a sleep aid podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Do you find your mind spinning and churning? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones that you can't solve right now and will probably be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns, but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night. Before we go any further tonight, I just need to take care of a bit of business. I'd like to encourage any listeners to join me on the Facebook page, facebook.com/sleepytimetalespodcast, to give ratings and reviews there and make recommendations. Like it or not, Facebook is one of the biggest games out there, and traction on Facebook goes quite far to help get the word out, so that would be much appreciated. Same goes for Twitter and other social media. I'm still trying to figure out a use for my Instagram. It's one of the social networks that make me feel like an old man yelling at clouds, but I'm sure I'll figure out something eventually. But for now, Twitter and Facebook are pretty much where it's at. Find me on, as I said, on facebook.com/sleepytimetalespodcast, or on Twitter at sleepytimetales. Also, if this show helps you to find a good night's sleep, it may help others. So other than reviews on your podcatcher of choice, it also helps to share widely on your social media and to anybody you know who may be struggling to sleep. If you haven't found it yet, I've done some updates recently on the website, sleepytimetales.net. Got a nice looking little theme going and a built-in player, which is quite cool, courtesy of Radio Public. It's worth checking out there. Also, I'm working on getting a few more blog posts up about other methods to help people sleep and rest. Any comments, questions, suggestions can be emailed to contact@sleepytimetales.net, and you can also find any links to the social media and anything else of interest, also YouTube, on the website. If you're enjoying this show and or finding it useful, other than spreading the word, which really is the main thing, if it's within your means and the show is helping you a couple of nights a week, or you like me and you leave shows running in the background, it would really be helpful if people could contribute, again, if you have the means and if you're inclined, to help cover some costs. And also, I'd like to start upgrading my equipment, because I think I've basically reached the limit of sound quality that I can with what I have. In terms of financial help, there are a couple of options. The big one, obviously, is the Patreon, which you can find at patreon.sleepytimetales.net or patreon.com/sleepytimetales. I've got 3 levels there going at the moment. I've got a $1 level where your name gets listed on the website. I've got a $5 level where you get the listing plus episodes without this whole promotional section, and a $10 level where you get story-only episodes, and at the moment a monthly movie review. My first review for the movie Bumblebee has gone up, and I will soon record the June movie, which is Cosmopolis, the 2012 movie directed by David Cronenberg and starring Twilight heartthrob Robert Pattinson. I've never seen any Twilight movie myself. I've seen enough stills and clips. But Pattinson has developed a career as a very fine actor in independent movies, and he's going to be the next Batman apparently, so it should be an interesting watch. I'll be watching Cosmopolis and posting the episode towards the end of the month for the $10 patrons, and I will also be posting a poll for July's movie, so anyone interested in backing at the $10 level can have a say in July's choices there. And as a reminder, so the $10 you get the bonus movie review, you get the vote, and you get a story-only version of each episode, as well as the website listing as well, and the $5 reward level, which is the episode without the promotional section. starting to develop a nice backlog, so there's stuff there to help you get to sleep for quite a while. So maybe worth taking a look. So just take a look at the Patreon and see if you're inclined. If a monthly commitment is a bit much for you, there is also a tip jar up on the website, sleepytimetales.net, and any spare change you have, you can throw my way, and literally anything will help, so anything will be appreciated. Another way you can help without costing yourself anything extra is to check out affiliate links on the in the show notes and on the website. Mostly sleep-related things, and also sometimes stuff in line with the themes of the episodes. And also, even if you go through those links, it still helps me, even if you don't end up buying anything linked directly. Also, the music in this episode and all episodes thus far is Un Désert by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as there's some very cool stuff there released under various names that I recommend checking out. Back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? And what is a sleep aid podcast? To answer your question, let me start with a common problem. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with the anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I still struggled to sleep. It was only fairly recently, in my sort of mid-30s, that I discovered the tendency for droning male voices to put me into a deep sleep. I had been listening to podcasts before, but I started listening to them specifically for the purposes of knocking me out at night. And eventually I found out that sleep aid podcasts are a thing. I tried one out that worked very well for me, but it was designed specifically to distract the spinning mind. But while it worked for me, whenever I recommended it to other people, they didn't like the narrator's voice. And there hadn't been anything else quite like it that I'd found up to that point. So I wondered if I could make my own. I've got a boring, deep, drony voice myself, so maybe it's something people could find helpful. Every episode starts with this long intro, and there's a purpose to it. It's to explain to new listeners the idea and sort of process that thought process that goes into creating the show and how to deal with the show. And for longer running listeners, some people have been with me for quite a while now, it's an opportunity for them to sort of start getting into the mode to sleep and settle down. What you need to do right now is make sure your lights are out, tuck yourself into a bed, make sure your room's not too hot but you're still nice and well snuggled under the covers. These are the sort of environments that help to get the hormones released that help us to sleep at night. The idea is that what we're going to do is we're going to build a space together. So this is why wrapping yourself up nice and tight, and however it's comfortable for you. Some people don't like to be wrapped up tight. We're building a space together, a sort of mental nest for you to sleep in. The basic idea is that you listen to me closely as I tell you tonight's story, but that's the story that I tell stops your spinning mind, the distractions and stresses that prevent you from having a good night's sleep. Tonight I'm going back to the well of Greek mythology, inspired by a Broadway play that I've heard of recently called Hades Town. It is a modern retelling of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, his wife. Orpheus went into Hades to collect his deceased wife, and because he couldn't stop himself from looking back at her, he lost her forever. A bit of a sad story, but nothing too disturbing in it. And the Greek mythology episodes seem to actually be quite popular with people, or mythology episodes in general. So as I said, the purpose of the story is to keep your mind engaged. You need to listen to it just enough to keep the other creeping thoughts from coming in, but don't listen so closely that the story itself actually distracts you. The plan is that while the story itself is actually quite interesting, my boring drony voice and the slow way that I'm going to tell it to you sort of encourages your mind to wander off eventually into sleep. It's very important though that you don't force it. Keep a light mental grip on my voice and the story that I tell, but don't grip mentally so tightly that you just cannot let go. Obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important that you don't feel too pressurized about that. It may not work on the first night. Sometimes starting to sleep is like developing a new habit, and it might take you a few nights. You might find my voice strange, my accent strange. Maybe an episode isn't long enough, so queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I tend to do with sleep podcasts is I let them stream all night. I lie down in the dark with earbuds in and just let them run. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m, the stream is still running and I let the voices waft me back to sleep. Sometimes I even wake up 30 minutes before my alarm. What I usually do then is I still carry on listening, and sometimes I just go right back to sleep. Let me tell you now that 30 minutes is sometimes the most restful part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that just satisfies on a very deep level. So you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. You'll always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes life harder, so I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well rested and be better able to cope. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. I want you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself to let go and fall over the edge, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the greatest enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go. So take a breath and forgive the fact that you can't sleep, and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel something like an enemy, but it is not your enemy. It's a natural process, it's part of our design, and we've been pulled away from it by stresses of life and the progress that makes us shine bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. And if you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. While I was trying to figure out the theme of this week's episode, I had decided already that it was going to be one of my mythology episodes. I wasn't quite sure what story to choose. Mythology is very broad and very deep, and there's a lot of stuff there, but many of the stories are like hyper-violent, and I want to keep away from things with too much in the way of decapitation and whatnot, especially early on in the story when most listeners are going to be awake. While I was considering, I was going through my Twitter timeline, and one of the people I follow on Twitter is the author Roxane Gay. She started tweeting about her impressions of a Broadway show, a new show just launched this year, called Hades Town, which I hadn't heard of before. It's a modernized retelling of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, one of the very well-known ancient Greek myths. It was particularly funny, actually, because she wasn't familiar with the myth itself, so her sort of almost like live tweeted impressions of Orpheus's bad decisions that lead to the tragic ending of the ancient romance were quite humorous. She's a very good follower on Twitter, by the way, so I highly recommend her, along with most of her work. So basically, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice is the tale of Orpheus going into the underworld to rescue his dead wife. Hades Town, as I mentioned, is a modernized retelling of that story with it was actually initially a musical album in the year 2010 by Anais Mitchell. She's a folk singer from Vermont, with actual no connection to musical theatre, but a fascination with the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. It originally became a musical off-Broadway in 2016. It did a little bit of a tour around North America, and launched again on Broadway this year. I was actually going to record this episode on Sunday night, but I just couldn't get the script together in time, and it actually worked out for the best, because Sunday night was Tony Awards night, and Hades Town won 8 Tony Awards, including Best New Musical, and a bunch of technical ones, including lighting and stuff like that. So well done to the cast and crew of Hades Town. I have a feeling it may be the new Hamilton, because just before the Tonys and since then, a lot of people have been going crazy about it. The music in Hades Town is amazing, and I definitely recommend that if you can give the original cast recording a listen. The original album is very good as well, but the musical one is a very strong jazz, blues, and folk-inflected style. Very bluesy start. Even my wife, listening to it, said this sounds like something involving a deal with the devil. It's very Robert Johnson-ish sounding sort of blues. The show has a 7-piece on-stage band, and it's set in a jazz club, and it transitions to Hades, the underworld, which is a factory. It addresses issues of climate, technology, labor, and immigration. There's even a song in it called Build the Wall, which is timeless in 2019, unfortunately, but was written in 2020 about keeping poor people out. So it's prescient in some ways. So like I said, it's very good to listen to. I highly recommend it. If anybody can get to it on Broadway, I'm sure it'll be amazing, and the cast recording is fascinating to listen to. Now, those of you who have been around since the beginning will remember that my first mythology episode was about Persephone and her in the underworld, as she was captured by Hades, and she eventually became the queen of the damned, queen of the dead. The Greek don't have the sense of the ancient Greeks sort of concept of Hades. Some of it was similar to the Christian hell, but a lot of it was quite different. There was only one underworld, including the good bits and the bad bits. Queen of the Damned just had a nice little sting to it, even though not everyone in the underworld of Hades was damned. And obviously, no real surprises there. Started out talking about Hades Town, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Greek underworld again. But first off, we need to talk about and learn about who exactly is Orpheus. Now, often in Greek mythology, saying who exactly someone is a bit of a tricky prospect, because every hero has multiple origin stories. Often these origin stories actually conflict with each other and don't support each other at all. The one thing we do know the one thing all the mythology agrees with, saying no as though he was a historical figure, he probably wasn't. The one thing that is common among all myths, no matter his origin, is that Orpheus was the greatest of all of the musicians of the ancient Greeks, and probably would be the greatest ever to be. Most stories have him as the son of a prince of Thrace and the muse Calliope. Orpheus himself was so beloved by Apollo, he was presented with a miraculous lyre. In some versions of the myth, Orpheus is in fact the son of Apollo himself. I've spoken about Bellerophon before, who was the son of a god who grew up as the son of a king, the king not knowing that his wife had cheated on him. So yeah, not unheard of in mythology, so entirely impossible as far as these stories go, that he was the son of both a prince of Thrace and Apollo and the muse Calliope. Despite being beloved by Apollo and the son of Apollo, he was devoted to the god Dionysus, the god of basically parties and wine and the mysteries. He practiced the mysteries of Dionysus. Very little is known about the Dionysus's mysteries, because mystery cults in ancient Greek and Roman times were limited to initiates, and they were very secretive. Records weren't kept that could fall into the hands of outsiders. An interesting thing about cult of Dionysus is that all parts of society were included, including women and slaves, nobles and commoners. They were all basically they were all adherents to Dionysus and the sort of ecstatic cult of the god of wine and celebration. As I say, not much is known exactly about the cult of Dionysus, but it is generally accepted that it was an ecstatic cult. Dance, music, wine, and possibly other narcotics were all used to create ecstatic states from the participants in the celebrations, which helped the people to shed their inhibitions to return to their natural states. The cult seems to have been widespread in Greece and Rome until Rome was Christianized, and all the cults and ancient religions were eventually wiped out or driven underground. And obviously society moves on and things change. So obviously Orpheus partook in the various celebrations of the mysteries. Even in some of the mythologies, Orpheus and Dionysus are often conflated as well, and many of what is known about the Dionysian mysteries are attributed to Orpheus. Orpheus was a great musician. He could sing beautifully and play his lyre better even than the gods, better even than Apollo. Orpheus could charm birds and beasts. He was so skilled that trees and rocks would dance. Trees would follow him as he walked through the woods playing. Rocks would move around him in circles to try be near him. Dionysus, with his song and his music, could enchant anybody, mortal or god. Early in his life, Orpheus always had a bit of an adventurous streak. Whether he was the son of a god or son of a king, he had a fondness for adventure. Early in his life, he traveled with the great hero Jason on the ship the Argo, with Jason and his Argonauts. They did a lot of great adventuring before they retrieved the Golden Fleece. One day I'm sure I'll tell the tale of Jason and the many adventures he and his crew got up to. In their travels, they encountered the great sirens, the terrible sirens. These three temptresses would stand on the rocks and sing their songs. They appeared very beautiful from a distance, and their music would call to the sailors coming past, call them and beckon them on. The sailors did not have the power to resist, and they would steer their ships too close to the rocks, where they would be smashed, and the sirens would feast on the bodies of the stricken sailors. In the Odyssey, Odysseus and his crew encountered the sirens as well. How Odysseus and his crew get by it is they all basically cover their ears so that they can't hear anything except Odysseus, who he makes his crew tie him to the mast of his ship so he can hear, but not do anything that ends up with him on the rocks and eaten by beautiful monsters. However, it was a much easier situation for the Jason and the Argonauts, because they had Orpheus in their crew. Because as beautiful as the singing of the sirens was, the singing of Orpheus was even more beautiful. He was a far greater singer than the sirens themselves, and the music of his lyre prevented the crew of the Argus from being enchanted. Orpheus's music was so beautiful and so appealing that the crew didn't even hear the music of the sirens and had only eyes for Orpheus. Only one of the crew members, Beauties, heard enough of the music of the sirens that their spell reached him, and he jumped into the water. But it even ended well for Beauties, the unfortunate, because he was rescued by a sea nymph called Cerberus. Incidentally, pretty much everybody in these mythologies could be 2 or 3 separate other characters. It was possible that Cerberus was actually the goddess Aphrodite, because in the Aphrodite cult, she was often referred to as Cerberus, was one of her many names. It was an exhausting journey for the Argo and its crew to reach the island where the Golden Fleece was hidden, and Orpheus performed many feats in the course of this journey. One of the main things he did was that when the heroes that were rowing spirits sagged and their arms grew tired and their backs grew weary, he would play his music and revitalize their energy and lift their spirits and get them to continue, sometimes beyond even what rest and food could do. Orpheus's music reached the depths of the souls of everyone who heard it. Sometimes exhausted men would start to get into fights and things could get dangerous and violent, but Orpheus again would pull out his lyre and sing and would quell the arguments, would soothe the savagery and the exhaustion and the bad mood of the men, and he would and tempers would settle and people would make friends again. His music was so powerful. I mean, remember, he could even make trees and rocks move. Well, I don't know if he made them move. I don't know if it was intended, but the trees and rocks would move him around. So even when the ship was moving away from docks and out to sea, sometimes he could sing it out into the open ocean without anyone having to actually do any rowing. It was some time after the journey with the Argo and Jason and the Argonauts that Orpheus first encountered the beautiful wood nymph Eurydice. He was immediately smitten with her beauty. Nymphs obviously are well known for being very appealing to mortal men and gods alike, but nymphs generally were wild and shy and weren't inclined to love anybody besides themselves and their sisters. They were free spirits that loved to be out in the wild and in the ocean and the air. Eurydice was a tree nymph, so she loved to spend time in the trees that were her friends. Nymphs are fiercely independent and they shy, and binding themselves in love and marriage to a human being, or even a god, is limiting for them, because they need to now focus, because once they're bound, they need to focus on that person, and their freedom is curtailed, and they did not wish to have that happen to them. Orpheus, though, was an extremely good-looking man. She found him very beautiful. She enjoyed his attention and his advances, and she was, I won't say she was enthralled by his music, because he didn't use it to control her, but she did find it very beautiful, and she admired the clarity and beauty of his soul, which his music reflected. He didn't actually use his music to spellbind her, as he could have done probably, but he did use it to impress her. So for a long time, as much as she actually found him appealing, she resisted his charms. Despite her fondness for his skill as music and his skill with words and his poetry and his beauty, She resisted. Eventually, after several months, he won her over, however. They'd spent a lot of time together, and she realized that maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing to be bound to this mortal. He wasn't like others. He had a soul that just shone brightly that she could bask in. And he never demanded that she stop with her life in the trees, with the trees, and in the wild with her sisters, the other nymphs, those of the waters and of the trees. And so she eventually agreed to marry him. She wasn't scared to bind herself to him because she felt that she would still have freedom with him, despite the fact that he was a mortal and she was a nymph with a wild spirit. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear. The sun rose, and there were no clouds in the sky, no chance of rain or storm. The god of marriage, Hymenaios, blessed the wedding. He gave a speech, and he did the blessing, and he blessed the couple and the guests. He did, however, warn them that the happiness wouldn't last. He saw some darkness in their future, but they decided to dwell in the light in which they were in at the time. They didn't even think about his warning. It wasn't a particularly dire one. He just said the joy won't last forever. Of course, this is a bad omen from the god of marriage, who's blessing your wedding, but the day still went pretty well. The wedding was a beautiful affair with flowers and music and dancing and a great feast. Orpheus obviously played music for the guests. And then there were other musicians that played while Orpheus and Eurydice and their guests danced and sang. Some of the stories differ as to how long they lived as a married couple. Some stories suggest that it was as they left the party that things went wrong for them. Some suggest that it was a longer period of time than that. I'm gonna work on the assumption that they had at least a few months of happiness together. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a story if they immediately got married and suddenly disaster struck. Well, it's a common trope in a story, but I want to believe that they had a bit of a happy life, at least for a while, because it explains what comes later. Because no matter how much Orpheus and Eurydice married each other, loved each other rather, I don't think it would have been enough for Orpheus to have been so broken up with the disaster that happened later. And so I'm going to assume that they left the party, the guests all left the wedding. Orpheus and Eurydice eventually they went to their home in the woods, and they lived happily for a while. I don't know what they would have done in the woods. Orpheus was a musician and Eurydice was a nymph. I'm not sure if he would have made a living as a farmer or a woodcutter, how they would have supported themselves, but it doesn't really matter. They lived together as a married couple for many months, or for several months, when the darkness first came in. Aristaeus, a shepherd, although in some tales in some of the stories, he's actually a son of Apollo and the huntress Cyrene, and the god of beekeeping, desired Eurydice. He was enamored of her beauty greatly, and he wished to make her his, and to kill Orpheus to get him out of his way, to get him out of the way. So one day he waited in the bushes on a path that Orpheus and Eurydice often used to take. He drew his sword and he jumped out from behind the bushes as they drew near, but he was a little bit too slow, so he didn't have the elements of surprise. Orpheus and Eurydice saw him emerge, looking with madness in his eyes. Orpheus got a fright. He took Eurydice's hand and he ran. They ran and ran for a very long time. It felt like hours and miles that they ran. Orpheus holding Eurydice's hand tightly the whole way, not allowing her to slip. I tend to believe the story about Aristaeus. Well, believe, and I suppose is a relative term when we're talking about mythology. I mean, these weren't real people, but for me the story makes more sense as Aristaeus as the son of a god, because Aristaeus was tireless in this pursuit. They ran for a long, long time, and he didn't slow down, and he didn't flag, and he didn't even have the inclination to stop, no matter how fast Orpheus and Eurydice ran. He kept up with them the whole way. Orpheus was running headlong, not really concentrating on where he was going or what he was doing. But then suddenly, as he ran, Eurydice's hand pulled out of his. He stopped suddenly in shock. He couldn't believe that she was waiting and that she had stopped. What had happened? I mean, they were being chased by a violent person swinging a sword. He turned around and he saw Aristeus had gone, because Aristeus saw what had happened to Eurydice, and he wanted to be away from there. Eurydice, as they ran, had put her foot on a nest of vipers that Orpheus had stepped over. She had been bitten by a viper, and her life was draining from her very fast. Orpheus held her and cried and called for her to come back to him, but she couldn't. Her life faded, and she faded, and she passed away. And so for a while, Orpheus was overtaken by darkness, where before, for his whole life, he had been a carefree young man, singing in the sunlight and in the moonlight alike, and dancing and playing his lyre, surrounded by animals and people and nymphs and gods and demigods. Now he was alone. His music didn't pull the trees and the rocks to him anymore. Didn't bring the animals and beasts and birds to him to cavort and dance. His music now made the people and the creatures stay away. There was no light in his song, no dance in his poetry. His life was only darkness. His song was only sadness. We don't know how long this carried on for. It may have been a few days or weeks or months. He wallowed in his despair until eventually one day he hit on a plan. The plan was bold and wild and completely impossible, but he believed that he could do it. He decided that he was going to go into the underworld and get his wife back. He thought he would go and his wife would intercede, well, not his wife, his father Apollo would intercede with Hades for the freedom of Eurydice. And so he made a prayer to his father and made the journey. He traveled for a while before he found an entrance to the underworld. I don't know how one finds entrances to the underworld, but he was a demigod, I guess, so he must have had a way. He found the entrance, and he sang and he played some music, and the rocks opened up for him, and he went down into the underworld. A little way in, he came across the great guard dog Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates of hell. Orpheus didn't flinch, though. He looked Cerberus directly in the face. I was going to say in the eye, but I don't know which eye he would have looked at, or even which face now that I think about it. And he sang of his sadness and his despair, and his desperation to find Eurydice. He sang and he played his lyre, and it went on so heartbreakingly that Cerberus covered his ears and his eyes and then howled and whimpered in sadness and allowed Orpheus to pass. Once Orpheus passed Cerberus, he wasn't hindered in any way again. He made his way to the throne room of Hades and Persephone, the great hall of the king and queen of Hades, the king and queen of the underworld. He stood before them and he impeached and he begged and he pleaded for his wife to be released to him, for Eurydice to be returned into the sunlight above. Hades and Persephone obviously weren't inclined to cooperate, because dead is dead and rules are rules. However, Orpheus obviously decided he had to sing of his pain, and he pulled his lyre off his shoulder and he started to play, and he sang of his despair and his agony and his sadness. He sang so beautifully and so sadly that even the great god Hades, the mighty king of the underworld, was moved to tears. And Persephone, his beautiful bride, who, while early in her life she hadn't really wanted to live in Hades, had come to enjoy her role as the dread queen of the underworld. She also was moved, and her heart was melted. Hades was a dreadful and fearful god, but he was not vengeful and evil. He wept openly at the tale, and as I said, Persephone's heart melted, and so Hades agreed that Eurydice could leave the underworld. But of course nothing is ever quite as simple as that, and so there were conditions. Orpheus had to walk directly out of the underworld, back through the entrance in which he came. He could not look back or to the side. He needed to go directly there, and he couldn't look back to see his wife. He had to have faith that she was coming, otherwise she would be lost to him forever. And so he did. Orpheus walked with his eyes fixed directly ahead. At first he walked alone, in silence. He wasn't sure if Eurydice would join him at some point, but eventually he heard footsteps that sounded like they could be hers. He nearly glanced back at her, but he resisted. He remained strong and fought the temptation to ensure that she was following him. He was beset by doubt and fear. Was it his wife? Was it some kind of shadow or illusion? He had no way to know without looking, but he remained resolute. He walked on, and he walked on, and he walked on. It felt like several hours. The darkness seemed to hold him back, and the presence of something behind him that could be his wife or could be something else called to him. But eventually he saw the lights of the exit. He quickened his step, and he rushed, and he emerged out into the sunlight. After his time in Hades and the cold depths of the earth, the touch of the sun almost burnt. It was so warm and so fresh. But he didn't take any time to appreciate it. As soon as he walked out with his eyes closed, he closed his eyes, let the sun wash over his face, turned to look at the exit to the underworld, and he opened his eyes. However, Eurydice hadn't picked up her pace to keep up with him when he started to walk faster. She hadn't emerged out of the darkness yet. She was near the entrance, still bathed in shadow. For a second he saw her face in shock and horror, reflected the shock and horror of his own as he realized what he had done. She reached out her hand to him, but too late as he reached out for her. Her hand melted away like mist and fell back into the darkness. Orpheus ran back to the entrance, trying to get in, but Zeus had sent Hermes to bar the way. Hermes was implacable. There was no way to get him to move. No amount of pleading or begging would get him to allow Orpheus back in. Hermes was so resolute, even Orpheus's songs didn't affect him. It was probably the first time in his life that Orpheus hadn't been able to get his way through song and dance and poetry and music. But Hermes was bound by Zeus, and Orpheus had broken the agreement with Hades, so nothing could be done. Orpheus was a broken man after this. He wandered away from the entrance to the underworld, absolutely grief-stricken and heartbroken. He became wild and disoriented in his grief. He wandered in despair. Day and night, he never returned back to his home. He just wandered through the woods, singing of his sadness and his despair, and playing his lyre, which never went out of tune and never sounded anything other than beautiful. But despite his wildness and his despair, many women still desired him. His grief, I think, called to them in a way. There's very often people are drawn to try to help those who are broken and in despair, even if it's not for your own good. But we often want to help those that desperately need it, even if we can't, and it will end up hurting us more if we try. So I think there were a bunch of women, or a number of women, who who came across his path, who wanted to join him and help him. His sadness actually took roots in them, but he couldn't bear any kind of contact with any woman who wasn't Eurydice. There was no joy left in his songs, only sadness. Eventually, one day, a group of women who were upset by his scorning them found him and attacked him. A whole mob of them descended on him, but he was so broken, so upset, he couldn't even resist them. He accepted the attacks and just stood and let them happen. They cut him down and they cut him into pieces, just completely dismembered him. They threw the pieces in the river with the lyre of Apollo. People who told the tale believed that his body, the pieces of it at least, floated down to the island of Lesbos, where the muses gave him a proper burial. It is told that the music carried on from his grave, that you can hear it sadly and faintly in the distance, and he returned once again to his beloved Eurydice in the underworld. There's a few interpretations of the story. Well, there's two main interpretations of the story. It's usually considered a story about a weak man whose lack of faith cost him the thing he loved the most in the world. And you can see that, after all, it was Orpheus's weakness that made him turn around and not have faith in Hades' promise. In some ways, it's parallel to the story of Lot's wife, who, in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, turned around to look back after being told not to and got turned into a pillar of salt. According to Plato, however, Orpheus was an example of cowardice. By electing to try bring Eurydice back to life, instead of dying to be with her forever, he was actually a coward. In this telling, the Eurydice that followed him out of the underworld wasn't the original Eurydice, but was in fact an illusion, a shadow, there to deceive him. A couple of other little variations on the story. One of them, Eurydice wasn't chased by Aristaeus. She was in fact chased by a satyr. The little slightly monstrous creatures that used to hang around with Dionysus. In Ovid's telling of the story, she was actually bitten as she was dancing with the naiads, the ocean nymphs who she spent some time with, rather than being running around with Orpheus at the time. It's considered by some scholars that Eurydice herself is even a late addition to the story of Orpheus. The first mentions of Orpheus in very ancient stories, but Eurydice is often a name often used for Persephone in some of her cult practices. It's actually interesting how often different characters pop up as different names in cults of the various types. The tale of Orpheus and Eurydice has been very popular in media going back for centuries. I studied opera when I did university, and one of the first things I studied was L'Orfeo by Claudio Monteverdi from 1607. I recommend actually anyone looks that up. It's quite gorgeous. The various versions of Eurydice and Orpheus were told to the time, including a ballet with music by Stravinsky, and of course most recently the musical Hades Town. And so that's tonight's story. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Sleepy Time Tales podcast, the sleep aid podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week, but make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes and maybe the odd bonus whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.